Well, All right, I assume it is time for the invocation. So welcome everybody to the Cum Laude ceremony. And I'll open with a prayer, a Kenyan prayer, a prayer from Kenya. From the cowardice that dares not face new truth, from the laziness that is contented with half truth, and from the arrogance that thinks it knows all truth, good Lord, deliver me. Amen.
And now for the history of the Cum Laude Society. It is the duty of the Secretary to say a few words about the history of the Cum Laude Society and about the requirements for election. The Cum Laude Society was founded in 1906 by Dr. Abram W. Harris of the Tome School. Dr. Harris felt that scholastic achievement should receive as much recognition as that given to other accomplishments. He envisioned a society modeled on Phi Beta Kappa, which would encourage and recognize true scholarship. Dr. Harris, with the Phi Beta Kappa members of the Tome School faculty, organized an interscholastic scholarship fraternity. At the first meeting in 1906, officers were elected and conditions were defined under which new chapters could be formed. The name Alpha Delta Tau was adopted. As Dr. Harris believed that chapters should only be established in schools of superior academic quality, the initial growth of the society was slow. Due to the rise in popularity of Greek letter fraternities of an entirely different nature, the name was changed from Alpha Delta Tau to the Cum Laude Society. In 1943, the Board of Regents of the Cum Laude Society authorized Headmaster Reverend William Brewster and 8 members of the St. Mark's faculty to found the St. Mark's chapter of the Cum Laude Society. Although the society has undergone changes over the years, its mission has remained the same, namely to honor and recognize scholastic achievement. Students are elected to the St. Mark's Cum Laude Society by vote of the faculty who are members of the society. In considering eligible students for election, the Cum Laude Society faculty members look for 3 things. Number 1, a high level of academic performance in challenging courses across the curriculum. Number 2, a clear demonstration of intellectual curiosity and leadership. And number 3, a promise of continued academic growth and achievement. Election to the Cum Laude Society is to recognize honor and academic achievement. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Peter Glomset. I teach in the English department at St. Mark's, and I'm the current president of Cum Laude. First of all, a warm welcome to the new Cum Laude scholars, their parents and families, and the St. Mark's community. Before we recognize them individually, I'd like to offer a few reflections. Svetan Todorov, a Bulgarian scholar exiled in France, wisely defined education in 3 words: studies, conversation, and travel. Why is travel so important to education? Our featured speaker, Ms. McCann, will be speaking about her experiences in Greece later on, but here are a few thoughts of my own. Travel can give us another life, according to the great Caribbean poet Derek Walcott. Walcott grew up in St. Lucia when it was still a British colony. In English classes, he read poems and novels about daffodils and snowfall. He saw this as a compliment to the oleander and the heat of St. Lucia. It gave him the possibility of another life, he said, more real because it lived on the page, in imagination, and therefore in memory. The humanities can give us other lives by connecting us with worlds outside our own. These worlds can provide us with ideals, alternatives, compliments, warnings, and questions. Are there places that have it all figured out that can serve us as beacons or blueprints? Are their solutions right for them, but not for us? Have other places messed things up, making us thankful to live where we do? The answer is all of the above. When we see another life in its complexity and can compare it judiciously with our own, we are acquiring another life. In challenging times, other lives tend to vanish from our consciousness, but this is exactly wrong. Other lives are enormously valuable resources in finding better solutions. How did I first start thinking of travel as acquiring another life? Well, not by choice, by immigrating to the United States with my family from Sweden. I grew up hearing conversations about how differently Swedes and Americans live and how differently they think about their lives. Like many of you, living in two lands gave me a second life. Yet the cultural features of Sweden, holidays, food, and so on, matter much less to me than the outlook of Swedes. People in a small country are compelled to reach out, learn other people's languages, watch films and listen to music from other lands, and to seek to join a larger conversation. If, like me, you happen to be born into a second life, you're not done. We can acquire more than one, and the effort we put into acquiring others may be even more rewarding. I taught classes on American studies in a French-speaking university in West Africa for 3 years, coincidentally on the same fellowship that took Miss McCann to Greece. From conversations with my Senegalese students in classrooms, hallways, and cafes, I learned as much about their lives as they learned about American life and literature. Back in the US, I give voice to their questions, reactions, admiration, and criticisms when I teach Walt Whitman, Frederick Douglass, and James Baldwin. The travel I am describing can just as easily take place in time as in space. Any past era can offer us another life, but classic students know there's something special about ancient Greece and Rome. Our writers still use their genres. Our courtrooms still use their juries. We hold the Olympic Games. We have adapted their political institutions. But Greece and Rome are also strange societies whose odd religious practices and questionable attitudes towards others we may prefer to leave behind. But that's why they're such important mirrors on our world, as well as windows onto others. Our classics teachers are not only inspiring guides to the strangely familiar and familiarly strange destinations, they teach the language skills that are the means of transport there. One can acquire another life without learning another language, but there is something special about doing both at the same time. In part, it's the dislocation from the familiar that is so powerful about learning how to speak, write, read, and listen in a new language. But it's also the chance to see ourselves in a new way. When asked why the French should study Latin, the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau replied, to learn French and to learn what grammar is. If we only spoke one language, there would be much that we didn't know about ourselves. Learning a language is a bridge to another life that we can build or at least co-construct. It allows us to step out of ourselves for the moment, to give ourselves over to another way of life, to enrich our lives by translation, to wonder how we would see the world had we been brought up in another. I'd like to end these reflections with a thought by William Humboldt, an 18th century German philosopher. By the same process whereby we spin language out of our being, we ensnare ourselves in it. Each language draws a magic circle around the people to which it belongs, a circle from which there is no escape, except by stepping out of it into another. Thank you. Next, I'd like you to join me in recognizing the new Cum Laude inductees. Kartik Chakrabarti Dhanapudi. Thomas Joseph Flathers. Tate O'Connell Frederick. Frances Isabel Hornbossel. Brillen Javon Shamar Joseph. Grace Young Lee. Cara Lindsay Mulcahy, James Thomas Oblock, Waverly J. Shee, Cadence Arwin Summers, Oliver Chan, Jing Samantha Wang, Lena Zhang, Ning Richard Zhang, and Baining Kathy Zhu. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to say farewell and thank you to Gina Cook, Cum Laude's able assistant, a classics teacher who does so many things in our school so well. She is on her way to Australia. This is perfect since the Greeks may be said to have discovered Australia, even though they rarely sailed out of the Mediterranean. Greek philosophers came up with the idea of the Antipodes, an imagined continent on the opposite side of the world from Greece, where everything worked in the opposite way. Ms. Cook will have the chance to confirm for us whether drains really run counterclockwise there, whether mammals really can lay eggs, whether the way Australian classics teachers teach Greek and Latin is topsy-turvy. We will miss her. It's a great pleasure to reintroduce to you Miss Sarah McCann. It's fitting that I give this introduction, for I have known her longer than anyone at St. Mark's. At the end of the day of her job interview, our headmaster waited outside my classroom door to ask me what I thought. I said, give her an offer as soon as possible. We know her as a wonderful English teacher, an instigator of road trips to the Dodge Poetry Festival, organizer of the Gray Colloquium, which has brought to St. Mark's such living treasures as novelist Julia Alvarez, poet Mark Doty, innovative scholar in technology and communication Sherry Turkle. Miss McCann's dog Murray, a feisty pint-sized terrier, is a celebrity on campus. Walking from West Campus, you may have seen Murray and my strapping pit pointer mix Argus reenact a leashed but classic confrontation. David versus Goliath, Achilles versus Hector, St. Mark's versus Groton. According to her husband, Dan Birdsall, she loves hand-woven Persian rugs, cherries, carnival rides, miniature golf, and Broadway musicals. Miss McCann finds the time for an active creative life alongside her teaching, though perhaps alongside is not really the right word. In addition to writing poetry, she's a translator from modern Greek who has traveled to Greece on a Fulbright fellowship. She tends to be reticent about this secret life. Among many reasons I asked her to speak today, I hoped she would talk to us about her creative life, her travels, and the art of translation. Welcome, Ms. McCann.
Hello, and congratulations to all of the new inductees to the Cum Laude Society, and congratulations to the warm community that supported them. Inductees, I hope you hold both pride and humility on this day. Pride at your efforts and successes, and humility in knowing that there were family members, St. Mark's faculty and staff, and peers who challenged and inspired you to get to this point. Cum Laude members, you are being recognized today as, Latin students will know, worthy of praise. You are students who have developed and valued the ability to praise, whether it be praising a novel, a sculpture, a robot, a theorem, and so on. Anyone can make fun of a new style of painting or an old way to solve a problem, but when one takes the time to understand the why behind something, that care is extraordinary. The ability to praise doesn't have to be difficult. One merely needs to pay attention. I think the best way to talk about a life worth living is to get to what I think is the most important thing a human can do: pay attention. It is a kindness, a way to show care. Paying attention is not simply what you do in class to get into the Cum Laude Society. I want to talk about the joys and journeys of paying attention, and I hope you can glean that I have tried to be attentive in my life, but that one can still be attentive and stumble on things. First, you'll all be surprised that I'd like us to consider poetry. You can find my book of poems in the library if you'd like to see what I do in my spare time. Poetry, good poetry, can be the purest literary form of paying attention, since its language is so distilled. Every poem is a love poem because of the attention the poet paid in considering her words and the world she was creating for the reader. For instance, a horrific poem about war can be read as a love poem, celebrating life. I want to take a minute to read a part of a Mary Oliver poem so you can see what I mean. It is gruesome itself, but the horror of it turns tender because of Oliver's care. This is the beginning of Beside the Waterfall by Mary Oliver. At dawn, the big dog, Winston by name, reached down into the leaves, tulips and willows mostly, beside the white waterfall, and dragged out into plain sight a fawn. It was scarcely larger than a rabbit, and thankfully it was dead. Winston looked over the delicate, spotted body and then deftly tackled the beautiful flower-like head, breaking it and breaking it off and swallowing it. All the while this was happening, it was growing lighter. When I called to him, Winston merely looked up, grizzled around the chin, and with kind eyes, he too, if you're willing, had a face like a flower. This poem, if I were to summarize its plot, is about a dog finding a dead fawn, snapping off its head, and chewing it up. But you students know by now that a poem is not about its plot. We are welcomed into the poem by its slowness of discovery, its listing descriptions of a bucolic scene. Then comes the dead fawn. It is as much of a surprise to the reader as it is to Winston, the dog. The reader is most likely repulsed, but the dog is overjoyed, naturally. The smell, the taste, the touch of death is turned upside down by the dog's experience. And Winston, an animal himself, is not a monster. He's a sweet dog with kind eyes and a face like a flower. Mary Oliver shows great care and attention to this somewhat disgusting event, and she knows that it might be difficult for the reader to see the beauty in it. She allows the phrase, "if you're willing," to slip into the middle of her angelic description of Winston. Yes, it's sad that the fawn died, but one can experience that loss along with Winston's absolute joy in finding the carcass. Poets pay attention. If you ever see me walking on campus looking at my phone, I'm most likely doing one of two things: playing words with friends, I'm really good, or noting down a line or phrase that came to me during my walk. I have a whole shelf in my house full of journals with these lines and phrases, and I use them in my poetry. And if poetry is an elevated way of paying attention, translating poetry might be even more discerning and intimate way to pay attention. I began writing poetry in 9th grade, but I also began learning modern Greek. I had always been fascinated with Greek mythology, so my uncle agreed to finance my embarking on a 5-week program on the island of Crete, which offered immersive lessons on Greek culture, language, history, and daily life. Listening to the musicality, the poetry of modern Greek for some weeks, I made the connection between this experience and my fascination with poetry. I continued learning Greek in college, and through my university, I spent the summers and the first year after college in Greece, working on my language skills and meeting some people in the literary scene of Athens. After graduate school, where I was deemed a master of poetry, I was one of only 2 people ever awarded a Fulbright creative grant in Greece. This allowed funding for me to engage in a sort of independent study, writing and translating. I had noticed a dearth of women poets translated from Greek into English, so I proposed to change that. I met with a number of Greek poets, and I spent the year in Athens writing, translating, and chatting. Often, I'd meet a poet for coffee to discuss a translation I had done of her work. Of course, I also got to know my fellow Fulbright friends, enjoying parties at the embassy, after hours museum visits, and just interesting conversation about the various projects we were engaging in. I also traveled across Greece in my downtime, and I got giddy when I saw that many cargo trucks had emblazoned on their sides metaphora, or metaphor, literally meaning to transfer, which is what the trucks were doing. But I was clearly in the right place. Metaphor everywhere. Paying attention to the signage on trucks was not the only thing I accomplished during this time, however. I did finish translating a book of one woman's poems, which has since been published. While I translated, I had to figure out how to bring the rhythm, the rhyme, the music, and the meaning of a poem into another language. No easy feat. I did it by paying attention, by reading slowly and closely, by living with the poems for a while. I also used a dictionary. Translation, whether you're doing it or reading it, gives you insight into a full and fuller culture and land. Most of what I read is in translation, and I can say from great experience, you always know when you're reading a bad one. If well done, you shouldn't even notice it's a translation. You should feel a part of a different world. As you can see, or hear, I love words, their sounds, their connotations, their etymologies. I pay attention to how people speak. I've learned many new words over the years through travel. I've learned them in different languages, and I've explored ways that they could be translated into English. What's so important to me about travel and spending time in a different place is to take time to understand cultures better. History, landscape, cuisine, and yes, words and language all make up part of the culture of a people. I travel not to be a tourist, not to pretend to be a local, but to pay attention and to learn from the locals. And I have found it's always important to learn a few words at least when traveling somewhere. Not only have I shared lots of free food that way, I've shared countless smiles. And I'll end with one more way I pay attention. Some of you may have been surprised when, upon coming back to school this fall, virtually or otherwise, you found out I was on maternity leave. What? Ms. McCann? She hates babies. Some of you have even voiced that you would never want me to be your mother. I'm looking at you, Michael Ferlisi. And yet here I was, perambulating around campus with little Asher Emmett or sharing him in an advisory Zoom. I hadn't even once put the baby in the microwave yet. Here's the thing, I don't hate babies, first of all. Second of all, babies and children approach the world with wonder. They are masters of paying attention. And that is because they don't actually or officially know much. There is still everything for them to experience and know and learn. As you get older, say to the teen years, one begins to realize that you can't pay attention to everything. You learn to sort things out, pay attention when it is required of you. That's a necessary skill, but it does limit you. The trick is to be able to wield that skill when needed, and also to remain open to paying attention to what you don't know you need, or what you don't yet know will be interesting. This idea was solidified in my mind when, after my flight from Newark to Greece on 9/11/2001 was canceled. I was supposed to be heading to Greece for a year. I watched as the planes flew into buildings my friends were in and nearby. I crumpled to the floor in disbelief, not knowing what to do with myself. I was at my mother's house in preparation for my flight, and all other flights were banned except for fighter jets. The commuter trains that normally rattle my mom's house were stopped. My mom suggested we take a walk because there was nothing else we could handle. We walked around a silent neighborhood, silent except for the occasional jet screaming by. And finally, we came upon some sounds. Kids at a nursery school, out on their playground, their teachers huddled on a picnic bench, trying not to cry, knowing that some of these kids' parents might not make it home. The kids were running around, hooting, and a little boy yelled, "Look, a spider!" And all the others came sprinting to see. Witnessing that little boy's paying attention got me through that day. His excitement over a spider gave me hope, and he reminded me to pay attention, not just to the overwhelming and painful things. It was a necessary lesson that day and beyond. So, in poetry, in translation, in travel, and in children, I have learned to pay attention. But I have also learned to praise, to celebrate. And that is an important connection to make, I think. One can pay attention and still have a closed mind. Paying attention with an open mind, like the mind of a child, takes humility, confidence, and grace. How many of you can think of a person you know and respect for their wisdom that is accompanied by their humor or graciousness? My best teachers and my best students have all been brilliant, self-effacing people, open to wonder and as eager to learn from me as I was from them. They pay attention with open minds, and I might add, open hearts. Cum Laude inductees, today and beyond, we have praise for you and your open minds, your open hearts. You have chosen to live lives of paying attention and caring. Thank you to all here today. Thank you for paying attention, and thank you for continuing to pay attention. Congratulations.
I can tell by the spotlight that that I am on for the benediction. So in closing of the ceremony, a benediction attributed to the Buddha. Believe nothing merely because you have been told it. Do not believe what your teacher tells you merely out of respect for your teacher. But whatsoever after due examination and analysis you find to be kind, conducive to the good, and for the benefit and welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to, and take it as your guide. Amen. Congratulations, and this closes the Cum Laude ceremony.